when I'm with you, there's no one else around. Yeah, I'm so high, gravity can't hold me down. Imagine faith and hope so alive. You got me feeling so good, 'cause baby, you're like the sun.
Welcome to Me, Myself, and Liberty. I'm Leslie Nesmith, and I have a very exciting show for you today. I know I say that every time, but this time it's for real. I have Nick Tombolides on with us today, and he is the Executive Director of Term Limits. This is a very important topic. I know it is a hot topic today, and he actually testified before Congress on this subject, so we're going to talk about that. Also, I'd like to ask you to take a minute to share this and tag your friends, maybe a few Democrats too, because we need to get everybody involved in this conversation. Because believe it or not, this is not really a partisan discussion. Also, go to patreon.com/OTUmedia to support us, to support me, to support this program, help keep our conservative cause in front of our audience. Also, follow me on Parler. That's Parler. It's not parlor, it's parler, like speak in French. It is much like Twitter, and it's where you have actual free speech, and you can share what you'd like to share without being censored. So we will be right back with Nick Tombolides.
Over 20 years ago, Alex Jones created the media platform called InfoWars, and in the decades since, it's grown into a truly remarkable institution with over 200 radio affiliates, tens of millions of unique website visitors monthly, and a 24/7 live news TV channel broadcasting from state-of-the-art studios in Austin, Texas. InfoWars has become the most trusted independent news source in the country, dedicated to delivering breaking news, live coverage of special events, and exclusive reports you won't find anywhere else. While the old guard media struggles to maintain supremacy in a landscape rocked by innovation and technology, InfoWars has been at the forefront of the information revolution. From 8 million radio listeners, over 2 million YouTube subscribers, or the billions of views of our online content, InfoWars proves dominant in every facet of media we enter. For the hardest-hitting reports, uncompromising analysis, for high-profile interviews and bombshell revelations, accept no substitutes. Demand truth. Demand InfoWars. InfoWars. Tomorrow's news today.
This is undoubtedly the most important broadcast we've ever done.
Welcome back to Me, Myself, and Liberty. And take a second, tag your friends if you haven't, get them to join us. This is a very important topic. So today I have Nick Tombolides with us. And welcome, Nick.
Great to be here. Thanks, Leslie.
All right, I'm going to tell the audience a little bit about you. Interesting guy here, and then I'll let you fill in any blanks. Okay, so Nick is the Executive Director of U.S. Term Limits. This is the nation's oldest and largest pro-term limits group. You serve as the editor of the Term Limits national blog at termlimits.com, so we want to make sure everybody gets that, termlimits.com. Your writing has been featured in the Los Angeles Times, Daily Signal, USA Today, Orlando Sentinel, and many other publications. You're a policy advisor for the Heartland Institute. This is a conservative think tank based out in Arlington Heights, Illinois. You've worked as a consultant for Fortune 500 companies and as a campus organizer for the Leadership Institute, which I find that very, very interesting. You also help expose liberal bias on campus, which kudos to you. That is so important, especially, I've got 6 kids, all of which will be on a campus at some point. So anything we can do to keep them from being indoctrinated is awesome.
Yeah.
You graduated from the University of Connecticut with a degree in economics. So you're qualified much like Ocasio-Cortez, huh?
Yeah, I think I did a little bit better in my econ classes than she did, but we could compare the records if you want.
Yeah,
If
maybe
she'll
you could
release
give
her
her-
transcripts, I will as well.
Yeah, hey, there we go. Maybe you could give her some tutoring in economics. That'd be awesome.
That would be nice.
All right.
Long overdue.
So fill in the blanks there. Did I miss anything? Anything else you'd like to add to that?
The one thing I think you might have missed, and that's because it's pretty new, is we recently launched a Term Limits podcast. On No Uncertain Terms. It's the official podcast of the Term Limits movement. So if people want to learn more about the movement or get involved, check us out. We've got 5-star rating. We've just hit our 50th episode, so we're rolling along right now.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's great information. We definitely want to make sure that we check that out. Okay. So I actually looked at the video from when you testified before Congress, and okay, so first I have to ask, how was that? Was that just, how was that?
Well, it was really interesting because I almost didn't make it out to the hearing. I was stranded at Richmond, Virginia airport. I live in Florida. I was flying up to D.C. and I had a connection, and I almost had to sleep overnight in the airport. I got very, very lucky. They got a piece of equipment just in time, and I got in, and I basically had to testify with like 2 hours of sleep.
Oh, wow.
So that was interesting. But the night before, just hours before my flight was about to take off, I get a call from one of the congressional staffers, one of the committee staffers, and he's reading over my remarks, and he says, "You can't say this to Congress. You can't compare members of Congress to head lice. People just don't talk like that in Washington, D.C." So I'm like, oh, Lord, what am I going to do now? Redo this entire thing? What happened was I sent him a version of my remarks that was a little bit more sanitized, and then when I got there, I just did the ones from the heart. I just, said what
awesome.
I really felt. Moral of the story: don't listen to congressional staffers.
Oh,
But,
no, I totally agree. I was actually, when I was watching the video, I was like, okay, this is hilarious. How did he get away with it? Now I know.
Right. Yeah, well, we could play the video if you want, and then we could comment on that. But I will tell you a little story.
Okay.
The line that they really didn't like was that I compared members of Congress to head lice. And after the committee hearing, Ted Cruz, Senator, walked up to me, and he leaned in. He said, "When you compared us to head lice, you were being much too generous." So it's like I knew at that moment I was cool. But it was a great experience. It was great to speak on that topic for the American people because it's just long overdue.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome. I love Ted Cruz. I'm part of the Ted Cruz fan club, I'm afraid. So, okay. So let's take a look at this first part of the video here.
Our first witness, Mr. Tumbelides.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senators, for providing me an opportunity to address this important issue. I want you to imagine for a moment that you are an employer and you've got some problems with your employees. When you hired these employees, they promised they would do exactly what you asked of them. But once they got the job, they became a nightmare. They stopped listening to you and started using the job to line their own pockets. They took the company credit card and racked up more debt than you could afford to pay back. They became so obsessed with keeping their jobs that they forgot to do their jobs. And after all that failure, all that disappointment, and all that incompetence, your employees came to you and said, "We deserve a raise." If you're a reasonable person, that should make your blood boil. And yet, that is exactly what it feels like to be an American taxpayer. The first 3 words in our Constitution are "we the people." It's written larger than anything else because the framers of that document, the architects of our republic, wanted to remind you at all times who's in charge. We the people. We are your employers, and you have an obligation to listen to us. So I come to you with a message from the American people. We demand term limits for members of Congress. In fact, according to the most recent national polls on the issue, 82% of Americans want term limits. That includes support from 89% of Republicans, 76% of Democrats, and 83% of independent voters. This is not a left or right issue. This is an American issue. In fact, term limits could be the only issue with support from both President Trump and former President Obama. Now, there was a time about 25 years ago when Congress was debating this. Nearly every opponent of term limits up here had the same rebuttal: experience, experience, experience. We need experience to do this job right. If only you leave your Congress member in office for decades on end, he or she will become such a policy expert that all our problems will be solved. In hindsight, that was one of the worst predictions ever. This system is broken. Congress has given us $22 trillion in debt, the longest war in American history, a broken healthcare system, a broken immigration system, a tax code written by lobbyists, an explosion of money in politics. Worst of all, too few here have the courage to address these problems because the only focus is on getting reelected. That's why it comes as no surprise that Congress has a 14% approval rating, and 60% of Americans say that they would fire every single member of Congress if they could. Congress is less popular than traffic jams, root canals, and hemorrhoids. You're beating head lice, but the lice have asked for a recount. Unfortunately, elections alone cannot fix this problem. Not because voters like you guys so much, but due to the nearly unbreakable power of incumbency. At the same time members of Congress publicly claim elections are free and fair, they secretly deploy every trick in the book to keep power. Incumbents get $9 in special interest money for every dollar that goes to a challenge.
Okay, we played a little bit longer of that than I had anticipated, but we can talk about it anyway because we're going to watch the whole thing. So what I thought was interesting is, so you talk about bipartisan support.
Yeah.
That 89% of Republicans, 76% of Democrats, and 83% of independents are for term limits, but somehow 98% are reelected.
Well, yeah, 10%. Congress has a 10% approval rating, but a 98% reelection rate. That's a sign of a horribly dysfunctional and broken system. I think it's very telling that every elected official goes back to their district every election cycle and says, we're going to do something bipartisan. We want to work across the aisle with the other side. But then when the rubber meets the road, when you come up on term limits, most popular bipartisan issue in the country, they suddenly disappear. And it's because this cuts against their own self-interest. The incentive of somebody in Washington, D.C. is to build as much power, clout, seniority as possible, siphon as many privileges out of the job as they possibly can, and stay in Washington, D.C. forever, climbing that ladder, towing the party line, never ruffling any feathers. And so Congress has just sat on their hands. But we aim to change that. We're building a grassroots movement all over the country. We're taking two approaches. We're going through Congress and we're going through the state legislatures. And when we do that, nobody in Washington, D.C. can stop us. I'm confident that we're going to achieve this because the American people, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green, Independent, everyone is for it.
Yes, I find that very interesting. So I want to talk about that when we come back from this break.
When I'm with you, there's no one else around.
Okay.
Another one drives a truck.
Visit cdluniversity.org.
At CDL University, and another success, another one drives a truck. Hey, gonna help you too. Another one drives a truck.
Hey everybody, Todd Tucker here, and everyone who knows me knows I love to read a great book, and right now I'm reading this incredible novel by local author Richard Engel. All you have to do is go to lastamericanpresident.com and say big right now on this book. The Last American President is a story about political intrigue, romance, betrayal set against the backdrop of the dissolution of the United States of America. It's great reading, and when you go to lastamericanpresident.com, lastamericanpresident.com, use the promo code OTU, you're going to save money. And not only that, but half the price comes back to OTU. So half the proceeds from this book come back so you can watch great programming like you see on the OTU Media Network every day. LastAmericanPresident.com. I highly recommend this book. Read it today.
System is broken. Congress has given us $22 trillion in debt, the longest war in American history, a broken healthcare system, a broken immigration system, a tax code written by lobbyists, an explosion of money in politics. Worst of all, too few here have the courage to address these problems because the only focus is on getting reelected. That's why it comes as no surprise that Congress has a 14% approval rating, and 60% of Americans say that they would fire every single member of Congress if they could. Congress is less popular than traffic jams, root canals, and hemorrhoids. You're beating head lice, but the lice have asked for a recount. Unfortunately, elections alone cannot fix this problem. Not because voters like you guys so much, but due to the nearly unbreakable power of incumbency. At the same time members of Congress publicly claim elections are free and fair, they secretly deploy every trick in the book to keep power. Incumbents get $9 in special interest money for every dollar that goes to a challenger. And if incumbents are having difficulty raising money, not to worry, they're allowed to send campaign-style mailers at taxpayer expense. That's to say nothing of all the free media and name recognition politicians naturally get just for being in office.
When I'm with you, there's no one else around. Yeah, I'm so high, gravity can't hold me down.
Welcome back. Okay, so today we are talking term limits, as you can see by the video. Okay, so Nick, I want to take you back to something we were talking about a minute ago, about the experience question, because even though the vast majority of Americans are for term limits, we get this pushback mostly from the people who are elected saying that experience, we need to get some experience, in order to be effective, right? So talk about that a little bit more, and then I want to read something from one of our state representatives here.
Well, it's very interesting. If you guys watched the debates in 2016 between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, Hillary's main argument was, I've got lots of experience. But Trump had a great line. He said, Hillary, you have experience, but it's bad experience. And this is exactly right for Congress. I've been doing some research in the last couple of days to try to figure out what were most congressmen doing before they got elected to Congress. And as it turns out, 71% of Congress were either professional attorneys or professional politicians before they got into office. There are 16 attorneys in Congress for every one accountant who's in Congress. That might explain, why we have a $22 trillion debt and we've done nothing to help pay it down. And we've got a 70,000-page tax code that nobody can understand. So we don't have a lot of diversity in Congress in terms of experience, because the only people who want these jobs, the only people who are pretty much self-loathing enough to run for Congress and spend 30 years in a seat raising money and kissing the rings of leadership happen to be the people that want to be professional politicians. Imagine if we had term limits and you could come to Washington, serve for a short while, and then go back to whatever you were doing and live under the laws that you made. We would see so many more teachers, doctors, small business people, people from all walks of life running for Congress who don't do it right now because they know they would be crushed by the seniority system. I'll also add this point about experience. Studies show us that members of Congress are spending 5 hours a day raising money. They spend 80% of their time fundraising instead of doing the job of being a congressman. Literally, they leave their congressional office, walk a few blocks down the street in Washington, D.C., and sit down in a call center like a telemarketer and just beg for money all day. That's not the job of being a congressman. That doesn't get you the right type of experience. And I think if we had term limits, there would be less focus on keeping that job. There'd be less focus on reelection, and they'd be free to actually read the dang bills and do the right thing. You know, we're a country of 320 million people. We're the most educated country in the history of the world. We have all the knowledge that's ever been recorded in our pockets right now. This idea that there are only 535 people in America who are qualified to serve in Congress, that is the height of arrogance. It really is.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. That's a great point. Okay, so one of our lawmakers here sent me some commentary on this when, because I always reach out to my audience before the show and I say, hey, tell me your thoughts on this, okay? So he sent me a message and this is what he said, and I want to get your opinion on this. And he's one of the good ones, so. Okay. It's important to note that lobbyists don't have term limits, nor do we ever vote for them. However, they tend to be the group that holds the greatest amount of influence in any political arena. Term limits, while in theory should stop a runaway elected official from derailing the train, do more damage to the consistency of the representation for any given district when added to the fact that every position is up for re-election at some point. Mandatory term limits also limit a district's wish to keep their elected representation, good or bad, which in effect is a loss of local control. While some may have the opinion that mandatory term limits are a good thing, I will have to mostly disagree. I believe that the best practice to rid an unwanted official is for a given district is to get involved, find a better candidate, get the voters to the booths, change a representation, cast a ballot. I think you know where we're going with this. So this also is where the incumbency issue comes in, though, right?
Yeah, well, I'll address the first point about lobbyists, because this is one that comes up a lot, that if you do term limits, somehow the lobbyists are going to have more control. I will tell you, I have worked now on term limits for several years. I have never had a single lobbyist walk into my office and say, Nick, I really want to help you get term limits because I'd like to have more power. It doesn't happen. If lobbyists like term limits, it would have become the law of the land 30 years ago. So let's just set that straight. You know, we've done hundreds of term limits campaigns all over the country, and in every single campaign, lobbyists contribute money to whichever side is trying to prevent, weaken, or abolish term limits from becoming law. So you can follow the money and see that they're voting with their wallets to say they don't like term limits. They don't like when new blood comes in because they want a lifetime subscription to one legislator, right? It's a very cronyistic system. In terms of the voters, we know it sounds good in theory, but in practice, it doesn't work. Because incumbency unchecked keeps good people from running for office. You know, incumbents in Congress get $9 from PACs for every $1 that a challenger gets. That means the deck is fundamentally stacked against anyone who would try to dislodge one of these incumbents. That's to say nothing of all the other advantages they have, like name recognition. They can spend their congressional budget on campaign-style mailers to their constituents. Sometimes they even send these mailers outside of their district when they want to run for another office, and then they bill the taxpayers for it later on. Not to mention, if you're an elected official, the media effectively run your reelection campaign for you by putting every single one of your press releases on the front page. So I would say it's hogwash to suggest that we have fair elections. The deck is stacked by incumbents. People know it. 90% of congressional elections either have one incumbent who's running unopposed or running underopposed, meaning they have an opponent who's put their name on the ballot, who's checked the box, opened a bank account, but they're not running a serious campaign. If you want to give voters more choices at the ballot box, you need more open seats, and term limits is the only way to get that.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I thought was interesting is the $9 for every $1. So the incumbent has about $9 for every $1 that a challenger may have. And what's interesting is that happened. I ran for Senate here locally in the state of Oklahoma. And that's exactly what happened here. It was almost precisely that was the ratio. And it was interesting because you have this this it doesn't line up. So you talk about people who want to fire, like the number of people that say they would fire everybody in Congress, right?
Yeah.
So, but then they get reelected. So it doesn't make any sense, and it is that incumbency advantage that causes that. So the people really aren't getting who they would, they're not getting rid of who they want to get rid of and bringing in somebody new because of that.
Yes, it's two problems. The first is the seniority system, right? How do they assign power to people in Washington? It's not based on how smart you are. It's not based on how many new ideas you have. It's based on how many gray hairs you have. If you've sat in that chamber longer than anyone else, you get a committee chairmanship, you get to be a part of leadership, you get to call the shots. Even though we have 535 members of Congress, there are really only about a dozen who hold the real power, that cabal of leadership in the Democratic and the Republican Party, and that consists of career politicians. If you're a new member of Congress, you need to toe the party line. You need to genuflect to those people in order to have any degree of influence. Otherwise, they're going to retaliate against you. And so that really puts a chilling effect on people who think independently. You basically have to go along with the party or you're going to be punished. That's an unfortunate side effect of not having term limits. But with respect to what you said, challenging an incumbent, when I moved to Florida, my supervisor of elections at the local level sent me a ballot. And I noticed that the race for the state representative was missing from the ballot. So I called the local elections office and I said, what's happening here? I think you sent me a ballot with a mistake. Aren't these guys up for election every 2 years? She said, no. That election has been canceled because nobody was willing to challenge the incumbent. And before we got term limits in Florida, over half of all the elections in this state were canceled every 2 years because nobody was willing to challenge the incumbent. 10% of congressional elections on average are canceled for that very same reason. So you don't really have the ability to vote them out when no one is willing to run against them.
Wow.
Because they're too powerful.
That is just crazy. Okay, we're going to take another break, and we're going to watch another video clip, and then we'll talk about that.
Introducing all new, safe, natural relief. A cannabinoid-rich, clarity and focus formula with 17 essential supplements. When it matters most, you've got a job to do. Anxiety isn't an option. Programmed to keep you moving. A product exclusively manufactured for Active Duty RX by Cantech Labs.
The incumbent advantage creates a barrier to entry for everyday Americans without the connections to fund a campaign. It is the case for term limits. Elections may in theory be capable of dethroning incumbents, but that isn't how it works in the real world. Congressional incumbents have a 98% re-election rate. That probably explains why Congress looks more like a country club than a melting pot. It's predominantly made up of lawyers and politicians and is disproportionately old, white, rich, and male. Term limits would give us a legislature that better reflects the diversity of our society. The message long-term incumbents send to young people like me seems to be, We want you just close enough to the political process to help us win, but don't get too close and take our jobs. The American people have lost confidence in this Congress, and for good reason. We routinely see abuses of power. 18 months ago, it was revealed that members of Congress were secretly using taxpayer money to settle lawsuits, some for sexual harassment. You still haven't disclosed how our money was spent and on whose behalf. So term limits is a check on arrogance, it's a check on incumbency, and it's a check on power. It's a way to restore political courage while bringing fresh faces and ideas to Washington. As Ben Franklin said, for the rulers to return among the people was not to degrade them, but to promote them. As Kanye West said, no one man should have all that power. Here's the dilemma we face. Over 80% of Americans want term limits to happen. Donald Trump and Barack Obama want it. It is being blocked purely by the self-interest of Congress. If this were a trial, you all would have to recuse yourselves because there is a colossal conflict of interest. If term limits pass, you won't stay in the limelight forever. You won't be the center of attention, and some people might even stop laughing at your jokes. You'll have to become
Welcome back. All right, since you mentioned Kanye West, I had to put on the hat. All right. So one of the things that you said there was that term limits equals diversity. So let's talk about that, because I know we were talking about age diversity. There's all kinds of diversity. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I think one problem that people recognize with Congress is that it really doesn't reflect what America looks like. You know, you can walk down a street in Oklahoma City or Orlando, Florida, or wherever in this country, and you see people of different genders. It used to be two. Now you see more than that, maybe. You see people of different races. You see people of different different ideologies. In Congress, it really seems like there's a lack of diversity. A vast majority of Congress members are old, very wealthy, very white males. And I think it says a lot that, people who have traditionally been, disenfranchised don't feel like they can run for Congress because they're being blocked by these career politicians in both parties. And so what we've seen at the state level is term limits have enabled more women to run for office and win seats because, as it turns out, women don't like being career politicians as much as men do. That's one thing that some of the research has shown us. It's also shown us that, again, professional diversity is very important. You don't want your legislature to be filled with lawyers. You want people from a diverse array of backgrounds who know how to solve problems. If you're a lifelong attorney or lifelong career politician, that doesn't make you an expert in healthcare, doesn't make you an expert in taxes, doesn't make you an expert on immigration. So how are you possibly equipped to solve those problems? If we had term limits, maybe we would get some subject matter experts in there who really knew what was going on and could tackle those problems firsthand.
Yeah, I think it's crazy that, especially the Democrats, are always screaming diversity, but we've got Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. That's their top two right now, which is crazy. But it's kind of like that. Well, but they're the ones with experience. They're the ones that can make a difference somehow. I don't know. And then you just now used a term. Okay, so you said that women, generally speaking, don't, or statistically speaking, or whatever, don't have the same desire to be career politicians. And you cited research. Do you realize you can't do that? You can't cite research because that's sexist.
Oh, is it really? Even research, even pro women research is now sexist. Oh my God!
You can't use facts. Facts are racist and facts are sexist. Okay.
Please stop the planet. I would like to get off.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Okay. Another thing that you talked about was the abuse of power. So the money that was used to settle lawsuits and that kind of thing. So let's talk about a little bit of the abuse of power that goes on as a result of this lack of term limits.
Sure. I think what you've seen, look at the 2008 financial crisis. It was so fascinating that during that financial crisis, when the net worth of the American people overall took a massive hit, the net worth of Congress went up amazingly during one of the worst recessions we've had in modern times. Look at the sweetheart deals that members of Congress get on their mortgages. Look at the insider trading scandal that we saw a few years back that really hasn't gone away, that members of Congress portfolios were performing a lot better than people who work at the top investment banks in this country. Is that because members of Congress are just brilliant investors who always know the right move? Of course not. It's because they know what's about to happen next. They oversee mergers and acquisitions and approval of pharmaceutical drugs and stuff like that. And they were trading off that information. I mean, this is textbook corruption. When you look at the sexual harassment scandal, $17 million in taxpayer money were kept in a secret fund for years and years and years. I talked to Ron DeSantis. He's formerly a congressman. He's now the governor of Florida. And he said when he was in Congress, they didn't even tell him that fund existed. They just kept that in perpetuity, and there was no accountability, no transparency at all. And it was basically a get out of jail free card for corrupt politicians who wanted to go around harassing interns and harassing staffers on Capitol Hill and then wanted to pay hush money. I mean, that is absolutely unacceptable. That falls well short of the Congress that this country deserves. We're supposed to be a republic where Congress really represents the people and is accountable to us. We need to have a zero tolerance policy for crap like that. And I think if we had term limits, it would really humble these guys and remind them on a daily basis who they were elected to serve.
Yes, and you actually just took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say that we're supposed to be a representative republic, and you look at the approval rating, the 14% or 10% approval rating of Congress, 98% get reelected, the lack of diversity overall, and they don't represent me at all. Do they represent you or anyone you know?
No, not at all. And I think the framers of the Constitution would be rolling in their graves if they knew what's become of Congress. John Adams was the person who said that the legislature was supposed to be a portrait of the people in miniature. It was supposed to look exactly like us. It was supposed to feel our hardship. Nobody believes that anymore. I mean, we've lost so much confidence in this Congress. They really are a permanent political elitist class that resides in Washington. They're there to siphon as much clout and influence out of the job as possible. And they've totally forgotten about their constituents. They're out of touch.
Yes, that is so true. Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to hear about what's next with you and what we need to know. Okay?
Cool. That actually happened.
Introducing all new, safe, natural relief. A cannabinoid-rich, clarity, and focus formula with 17 essential supplements. When it matters most, you've got a job to do. Anxiety isn't an option. Programmed to keep you moving. A product exclusively manufactured for Active Duty RX by Cantech Labs.
Greetings. Salutations. This is Moto with OTUmedia, here to tell you about the latest product on our shelves. If your boyfriend doesn't have a beard, then you have a girlfriend. Do you need a beard growth formula that's radio frequency programmed for maximum bioavailability? Then you need Bud Brothers Beard Co.'s Beard Growth Formula. Find it at the OTU Media store at www.oklahomataxpayersunite.com/OTU-store and continue to support OTU Media and Oklahoma Taxpayers Unite.
Welcome back to Me, Myself, and Liberty, and I just want to take a minute to remind you how you can support us and the conservative cause. Please go to patreon.com/OTU Media, And you can support us there. You can support us with $50 or $500 or $5,000. Whatever you would like to do will be appreciated. And as a reminder, we do have an election coming up in 2020 that we have a lot of groundwork to do, and that does take money. So we need your support. All right, Nick, tell us, I want to know what is next for for U.S. term limits, what's next with you, and how to find you and all that fun stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's one thing to talk about term limits. Everyone's in favor of this, but now it's time for action. We have to really come together, build a movement, and get this done. So that's the next step. We're working on passing a constitutional amendment for term limits on Congress. 3 terms in the House, 2 terms in the Senate, then you get the pink slip. You have to go back and be a real person again. Again, 82% of Americans are for it. There's no reason why we shouldn't get it done. The only thing holding us back is the self-interest of the politicians who would be affected by it, because as it turns out, the chickens don't tend to vote for Colonel Sanders. But we have a plan, though. It takes a constitutional amendment. You can do that with either a 2/3 vote in Congress or through a convention called by 2/3 of the state legislatures. We're working on both approaches. Whichever materializes first is what we're going to pursue. There have been 15 states, I think, including Oklahoma, that have called for a convention to term limit Congress. That would allow the states to bypass all the self-interest in Washington and implement it on their own. We've also got bills in the federal House and Senate filed by Ted Cruz, as you just saw, and Francis Rooney for the term limit. So we're working all of these angles. If you are a listener, if you are a volunteer, if you're someone who wants to get involved with term limits, probably the most effective thing you can do is ask your local official to sign the U.S. Term Limits Pledge, which you can find at termlimits.com, which is essentially a promise to co-sponsor and vote for our legislation. That's the best way you can help us. I'm confident that by building this movement, we will get this done.
Yes. So where can people find you? Let's talk about, I know you mentioned the podcast a minute ago and websites.
Termlimits.com is the one-stop shop for everything you need. That's where we host our blog. That's where we've got calls to action, so you can see which legislation we're working on right now and track it through the legislative process. That's where you can see which members of Congress have signed the term limits pledge and which ones haven't. We have a scorecard on there. So if a member has signed the term limits pledge and is sponsoring the bill, they'll have an A. If they refuse to sign it, they'll have an F. And we've got every single member of Congress in that database. So you can go look them up and see how they're performing, whether they're listening to the voters. If you want to catch us on a weekly basis to hear the latest and greatest from the movement, go on iTunes, go on Stitcher, subscribe to the No Uncertain Terms podcast, the official podcast of the Term Limits movement.
Okay, so No Uncertain Terms and termlimits.com. So I'd like all of our all of our viewers out there to please go to termlimits.com, take a look at that and share it. Help us get the word out there. Okay, anything else you'd like to share with us?
Just thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciated it, and wish you guys best of luck in the future. I think it's great that you're bringing the ideals of liberty to people in Oklahoma and beyond.
Yes, well, we really appreciate you coming on. This is so important. We've definitely got to get the word out there. So, all right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being with us today, and for our audience, we will be right back.
What was the hardest car to fix this week?
The Mercedes was probably definitely most
Really?
difficult.
What do you think was so tough about it?
All Mercedes, the glue, you can't get it in between there, and the braces, you just can't cut through it. You gotta, most of the time, just find a different route.
What did Anthony think about the Mercedes?
No, Anthony hated Mercedes.
How long did it take you to pick up like the R&I portion of it?
I did a lot of like stereo equipment and stuff like that, so I took a lot of parts from cars, and my friend Sean, you know Sean, and he's really good. That's all he did was take a lot of cars. Well, he's up in Colorado for his first job doing R&I, and I was welding for about 12 years. The guy was ripping me off, so I quit. And when I was driving home, he called me and he was like, "Hey, I got a job for you. We're going to start doing this." I was like, "All right." I did all that and went to school, paid the money to go to school, and came out and started pushing.
How much did it cost to do the PDR?
$6,800.
$6,800. And about how much do you say you've invested in your dent tools so far?
Probably a good 10 grand, easily.
So it's like any other mechanic or auto, like you gotta
have the right tools. No, you don't. Running pretty good, really good. Like awesome. The way you keep on it. I mean, cars coming in and out fast, really good. So.
All right. Well, we appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us today. This has been very good information, and please do check out termlimits.com for more information on that. Also, again, go to patreon.com/OTUmedia. And if you'd like to be on the show or know someone that you think would be a great guest, just feel free to contact me and let me know. I will see you next week.